The line between faith and manipulation is often thin. In the search for purpose or belonging, vulnerable individuals find charismatic leaders who promise solutions to their deepest anxieties. But what happens when these promises turn into nightmares? History is full of groups that began with seemingly noble ideals, only to end up tainted by brutal crimes. Before diving into the details of the 10 most shocking stories of cults that crossed every boundary, it is important to understand what defines a cult. It is not just about spirituality or unusual religious practices. A cult is characterized by unquestionable devotion to a leader or doctrine, often accompanied by extreme psychological control. People are isolated, deprived of their freedoms, and convinced that the outside world is the enemy. These groups often arise during moments of social or personal crisis, offering a sense of security in a chaotic world. But the price is high: brainwashing, blind obedience, and, as we will see, terrible crimes. In the following chapters, we will explore 10 cults that not only destroyed lives but shocked the entire world. From mass suicides to brutal murders, each story reveals the darkest side of humanity. Prepare for a dive into a reality as terrifying as it is fascinating. And if you think you've heard everything about cults, what's to come may surprise even the most skeptical. 1. Heaven's Gate, the technological end. In the late 1990s, as the world was beginning to embrace the allure of the internet and technology, a peculiar group decided their destiny lay among the stars. Led by Marshall Applewhite, the Heaven's Gate cult combined apocalyptic beliefs and science fiction, attracting followers with promises of spiritual transcendence. What began as a small movement grew, but not without a terrible cost. Applewhite, known as Do among his followers, claimed that he and his partner, T, were messengers from a higher realm. When T passed away, the cult became even more radical. They believed their souls could leave their earthly bodies and embark on a celestial journey to a place beyond this world. The key to this transition was the arrival of the Hale-Bopp comet in 1997. According to Applewhite, a spaceship was hidden behind the comet, ready to rescue the chosen ones. In March 1997, 39 members of Heaven's Gate were found dead in a mansion in California, all dressed in identical uniforms and Nike sneakers. They ingested a lethal combination of phenobarbital, apple juice, and vodka. The bodies were meticulously organized, reflecting the cult's discipline. To them, this was an act of liberation, not despair. The impact of this mass suicide was immense. The media explored the bizarre aspects of the story, from the uniforms to the farewell messages. However, behind the sensationalism, the question remained: how were so many people led to believe in something so extreme? But if you think 39 deaths are shocking, the next case will reveal the largest mass suicide in modern history. 2. Jonestown, the deadliest mass suicide in history. In November 1978, the world watched in horror as one of the most infamous cults in history met its tragic end, the People's Temple, led by Jim Jones. Born as a movement of inclusion and racial equality in the United States, the cult transformed into a regime of psychological terror and mass manipulation, culminating in the tragedy of Jonestown, deep in the Guyanese jungle. Jim Jones was charismatic, eloquent, and deeply disturbed. He promised a utopia where everyone would be equal, free from discrimination and poverty. To his followers, he was almost a deity. But behind the utopian rhetoric, Jones controlled every aspect of his followers' lives, isolating them from the outside world and instilling constant fear of imaginary enemies. In 1977, under increasing scrutiny from authorities, Jones moved around 1,000 followers to a farming colony in Guyana called Jonestown. There, he implemented an authoritarian regime with constant surveillance and severe punishments for the disobedient. When rumors of abuses reached the United States, Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate. He was greeted with a facade of normalcy but soon discovered people wanting to escape. While trying to help defectors, Ryan and others were murdered at the airport. The attack triggered the tragedy. Convinced they were under imminent attack, Jones ordered everyone to participate in a final revolutionary act. Using a mixture of juice and cyanide, over 900 people, including children, died in one of the largest mass suicides in history. Some were forced, others willingly complied, fully indoctrinated. The scene in Jonestown was devastating, hundreds of bodies scattered, symbolizing the magnitude of a manipulative leader's destructive power. If you think Jim Jones' story is terrifying, the next case will show how a small group can spread chaos and terror just as brutally. 3. The Manson Family, the Culture of Violence. In an era of counterculture and peace movements, Charles Manson built an empire of chaos and violence. His ability to manipulate vulnerable youth made him the leader of a cult known as the Family. Under his direction, they became the perpetrators of one of the most brutal and shocking crimes of the 1960s, the Tate LaBianca murders. Manson was charismatic and disturbing. He preached a mixture of religious philosophies and apocalyptic theories that attracted alienated young people. To him, the world was on the brink of a racial war he called Helter Skelter, inspired by the Beatles' song. Manson believed his group would emerge as the new elite after this supposed apocalypse. In August 1969, Manson ordered his followers to attack the home of actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, believing it would catalyze the war. The group brutally murdered Tate and 4 others on the property, leaving messages written in the victim's blood. The following day, they killed the LaBianca couple in an equally savage act. The impact of these crimes was profound. The idea that middle-class youth could commit such inhuman atrocities shook society's perception of safety. Manson wasn't present at the crime scenes, but his influence and manipulation were enough to secure a life sentence. The Manson family became synonymous with insane violence and the capacity of a leader to manipulate vulnerable minds to fulfill dark desires. And if this case showed the power of a small group, the next will reveal how a cult can cause mass destruction with chemical weapons. 4. Aum Shinrikyo, the sarin gas attack in Japan. In the early 1990s, Japan was shaken by one of the most shocking attacks ever carried out on its soil. The Aum Shinrikyo group, led by Shoko Asahara, turned its apocalyptic doctrine into an unprecedented act of terror. Armed with chemical and biological weapons, the cult demonstrated just how far blind faith and obsession can go. Founded in 1984, Aum Shinrikyo began as a group blending Buddhist, Hindu, and apocalyptic beliefs. Shoko Asahara, who called himself a savior, predicted an Armageddon that would destroy humanity, leaving only his followers as the chosen ones to rule a new world. But the cult quickly took a dark turn, accumulating political and military power. In 1995, the group carried out an attack that shocked the world. Members of the cult released sarin gas on 5 Tokyo subway trains during rush hour. The attack killed 13 people and injured over 1,000, causing widespread panic. The precision and coldness of the act, carried out by a supposedly spiritual group, were incomprehensible. Victims suffered paralysis and agonizing deaths as the Japanese government scrambled to contain the chaos. Investigations uncovered chemical weapon laboratories, biological weapons, and even plans to acquire a nuclear bomb. Shoko Asahara and several of his followers were sentenced to death, but the impact of the attack remains vivid in Japan's memory. The next case, however, will show that even smaller cults with ritualistic goals can cause massive destruction. 5. Order of the Solar Temple, Ritualistic Suicides. In the early 1990s, a series of macabre events placed the Order of the Solar Temple at the center of global attention. This Franco-Canadian cult, led by Luc Juret and Joseph D. Mambro, mixed Templar symbolism and apocalyptic beliefs. But what began as an apparently mystical group soon descended into a series of ritualistic suicides and murders that shocked the world. The order believed the apocalypse was near and that humanity would be renewed on a higher plane of existence. Luke Jurett, a charismatic doctor, convinced his followers that only those who purified themselves could ascend after the Earth's destruction. To prove their loyalty, cult members gave up their possessions and participated in secret ceremonies, often involving humiliating and threatening practices. In 1994, the cult collapsed. In Switzerland, 48 bodies were found at 2 different sites, many arranged in ritual circles. Most victims had been drugged or shot before being set on fire along with the temples. Among the victims were a couple and their 3-month-old child, killed with stab wounds under the pretext that the child was the Antichrist. Other deaths occurred in France and Canada, bringing the total number of victims to over 70. Although the main leaders died in the initial incidents, other members continued to commit suicides in the following years, believing they were following their masters. The story of the Order of the Solar Temple is a grim reminder of how seemingly harmless beliefs can hide deadly intentions. If these ritualistic acts were shocking, the next case will expose how a cult can destroy lives by exploiting the most vulnerable. 6. Rajneeshpuram, Bioterrorism and Political Control. In the heart of Oregon, USA, a cult led by the charismatic Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, also known as Osho, transformed a small rural community into a battleground of political and social conflict. Rajneeshpuram, as the city created by the group was called, became the stage for one of the largest bioterrorism cases in American history, marking the peak of the destructive influence of a cult. The Rajneesh cult began in India as a spiritual movement advocating meditation, sexual freedom, and rejection of social norms. However, after moving to the US in the 1980s, the group shifted its focus to expanding power. Led by Osho and his second-in-command, Ma Anand Sheela, followers established a utopian community on land purchased in Oregon. But coexistence with local residents soon turned contentious. As political and legal tensions escalated, Sheela took extreme measures to secure the cult's dominance. In 1984, members of the group poisoned food in local restaurants, infecting hundreds with salmonella. The goal? To discourage locals from participating in elections, allowing Rajneesh followers to control the government. The revelation of the attack was a national shock. Osho tried to distance himself from the incident, but the damage was done. Investigations dismantled Rajneeshpuram, and Sheela was sentenced to prison. Osho left the US, but his controversial legacy endures. If Rajneeshpuram used bioterrorism as a weapon, the next case will reveal how an apocalyptic belief led to a massacre in the name of faith. 7. Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments, the Apocalyptic Hoax. In the late 1990s in Uganda, a cult known as the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God attracted thousands of followers with promises of divine salvation and protection from the apocalypse. Led by Joseph Kibwetir and Credonia Mwerend, the group presented itself as a religious order preaching strict adherence to the 10 Commandments. However, behind this religious facade, the cult hid a deadly agenda. The leaders of the movement claimed that the world would end in the year 2000. They convinced their followers to sell their possessions and abandon their lives to prepare for the final repentance. When the prophesied day arrived, and the apocalypse did not occur, the cult's credibility was severely shaken. Fearing defections and questioning from their followers, Kibwetir and Mwerend took drastic measures. On March 17, 2000, hundreds of followers were lured to a special celebration at a crowded church. Once inside, the doors were locked, and the building was set on fire, killing everyone in a deliberate act. In the days that followed, more bodies were found buried on properties belonging to the cult, bringing the death toll to over 900. The massacre was one of the worst events related to cults ever recorded. To this day, the exact motives remain unclear, but many believe the cult leaders wanted to cover up financial fraud and failed prophecies with this final act of destruction. Throughout history, cults have shown how faith, when exploited destructively, can become a dangerous weapon. The cases presented reveal not only the horrors of the crimes committed but also the fragility of human beings in the face of emotional, psychological, and spiritual manipulation. From mass suicides in Jonestown to the dissemination of chemical weapons by Aum Shinrikyo, these cults demonstrate how far charismatic leaders with distorted ideologies can go. Many of these movements began with promises of belonging and purpose but ended in tragedies that destroyed lives, families, and entire communities. In all cases, one constant remains: the use of faith as a tool for absolute control. These stories make us reflect on how vulnerability, combined with the search for answers, can lead people down dangerous paths. More than that, they expose how power in the wrong hands is capable of causing large-scale destruction. Today, despite living in an era of greater information, cults and extremist groups still thrive, adapting their tactics to new technologies and the crises of the modern world. If there's anything to learn from these stories, it's the importance of questioning, seeking information, and protecting our freedom of thought. Cults cannot survive without followers, and awareness is the best way to combat their influence. As we close this dark chapter, the question remains: how far is someone willing to go in the name of faith?